switch topic a little bit to focus on immigration regulations for international students, and I'll focus on the F1 status. There are two types of work authorization that F1 students can obtain off campus. One is called Curricular Practical Training, CPT, and another is called Optional Practical Training, OPT. I just was curious, of all the employers here today, have any of you hired an international student on CPT or OPT before? I think Shamrock
Yeah, we have.
has. You have anyone else? Maybe not? New information? Okay. Well, international students, they're granted a type of non-immigrant visa classification called F1 status. And there's a code of federal regulations that publish the immigration regulations for the international students. And they must comply with those to maintain their F1 status. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar or have seen the type of immigration documents that they receive that shows their immigration status, but we'll talk about those, and that they need those documents when you hire them. A valid passport. They're going to be carrying with them an I-20 document. This is a certificate of eligibility, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. And also an I-94 card, which is really their permission to be here in the U.S. Yeah, there's the I-94 card. It's just a little tiny card, updated to show F1 and duration of status, and it's actually really expensive to replace if they lose it. And this is an example of an I-20 document. That's what we do. The University of Arizona, we have permission to host international students by the Department of Homeland Security. And there are designated school official called DSO, and I'm a DSO, and that means I can issue an I-20 document using the Homeland Security computer system. And I also have the permission to be able to grant the off-campus practical training. So while the University of Arizona, we must comply with these regulations to maintain our ability to host international students, I know that you as an employer must comply with Immigration and Custom Enforcement regulation to hire an international student. And as an employer, I'm sure you're concerned about making sure they have the proper documents for their I-9. You may even have to go through something called E-Verify. So again, with their practical training eligibility, it really depends on their degree level. It can depend on their field of study. It can depend on whether they're in a good academic standing. From our end, it's very complex to assess their eligibility and if they qualify for their off-campus practical training. But making it simple for you is knowing what kind of documentation you'll expect to see when you hire them. So does anyone here know the difference between CPT and OPT? Okay. Curricular practical training, this is a type of off-campus work permission the student has while they're enrolled in pursuing their degree, okay? And they really should have this authorization, whether it's paid or unpaid internship. And a typical degree-seeking student during the academic semester is restricted to 20 hours or less per week of work, and during the summertime can have up to 40 hours per week. You'll see the authorization for CPT on page 3 of the I-20, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like here. So an international student might come up to you after they've obtained their authorization. You as the employer should see your name and address listed at the top of the I-20. What's interesting about this is that this type of work authorization is simply granted by the DSO in our office. It doesn't have to go through any sort of extra government agency. for the optional practical training, this is a work authorization that the student gets after they've completed their degree, and it can be up to 12 months of work permission. Going back just for a moment, you do have a copy of our CPT packet in the folders that you picked up out front there. And I just remembered one more thing to add about the CPT. One thing that you can do as an employer to help our international student is write them a letter of offer saying that they've been hired. Although they won't have that work permission in their hand yet, we're asking them to bring it to us. And if we ask, to change the dates or amend those, it helps if you're flexible with that as well. So back to what we call OPT, and this is a type of work authorization that is actually, we recommend it on I-20, but it's the USCIS that generates an employment authorization document, an EAD card. And so there are several different types of OPT. We have just 10 minutes today, so I won't go into every part of it in detail. There's a pre-completion, post-completion is the most common type that I would focus on, but there's also the 17-month extension of OPT, and that's just additional 17 months beyond the standard 12 months. But I wanted to point out for the students in MIS, it's just the master's level MIS students that qualify for that extra 17-month extension. Go ahead.
When did they come up with the 17-month extension? How long has it been there?
It was in 2008. Very exciting change in the regulations, many new regulations that really opened up opportunities for international students. In fact, at that same time, they added a cap gap extension of work authorization. So, and I'll go into that a little bit in a moment, but yeah, I think employers,
Yeah, we're not, I don't think our community is aware of that.
Yeah, very exciting.
Another point, Bob and I deal with a number of firms that have maybe 3 to 8 employees. And so for what they would be interested in, they want your skills to say, hey, this is a people person, and they really understand such and such so-and-so in pretty good depth from the academic standpoint and from the experience standpoint. And they want to have, hey, can you mark US choice on their butt and be able to say, hey, everything's clear, that all the paper processing and Uncle Sam and whatever else has been done so that it's clear, and all I have to decide is whether I want them to work for me for 3 months or 8 months. Can you do that?
I think small companies, they might not have the in-house expertise on, knowing what types of documents, for the internet.
Many of them just turn to their wife and say, hey, I need somebody who knows something about such and such, and find me somebody, and as I understand it, the University of Arizona can help you. Call the business school and ask for, on the front here, and get them down here tomorrow so I can interview them. That's real world, so this is where our interface is very helpful. And many of those people who are hiring are people who came out of the innovation program of Eller 3 to 8 years ago, who have high-tech activities going on and have forgotten who to call.
Yeah, and this really makes me think, for a small company, it just made me remember I brought this. There's a handbook for employers on completing the Form I-9, so there's a lot of resources out there from the government that show exactly what kind of documents the international student needs to present, and they really make it simple, and this is a new revised version, and I think it helps support the companies.
I have a question. So for the student to get the OPT document, does the employer have to do anything, or?
In fact, what's interesting about the OPT is that it's not employer specific. So that's what makes it different from CPT. For CPT, they had to have that employer letter to get the authorization. For OPT, the international student gets a work permit They are expected to, you know, look for a job in the field of study commensurate with their level of study, but they literally can take that work permit anywhere to be hired. So USCIS, they just redesigned their EAD card. This is that work permit I was talking about, little card. This is what the new version's gonna look like. And that's what you can see when you learn.
So after the student graduates, they get this card, they apply for it, and any U.S. employer can hire them without them doing anything. And that permit is valid for our students for 29 months. So without the employer doing anything, you hire them just like a U.S. citizen. It just they show you the card that they are that they can legally work in the United States, and it comes with the degree that they're getting in the master's program.
29 months with some paperwork to get the extension.
Right, right. And sometimes, you know, the employer has to be flexible. Sometimes USCIS has some delays in issuing that card. So if you can be flexible with their start date, that's one of the best things you can do. Another thing an employer can help an international student on OPT with is writing them a letter when they travel. Because if they have to travel home for vacation and re-enter the U.S., you know, the port of entry officials are looking for a letter from the employer. Yes, the student's coming back to resume their employment. If there's any question that that job title doesn't match up with their field of study, the employer can also indicate, you know, a brief description of the job. So there's a lot of things that you can do to help an international student. And then the next part that I was going to talk about kind of may segue a little bit into Tarek's presentation on H-1B. And there's this little bit of overlap there. So if you have a student on OPT, they're doing so well, you know, they completed their degree, and now you want to hire them as a long-term employee, you'll be doing that by petitioning for an H-1B employment immigration status. And there's this in-between time where that work permit card could expire, but the H-1B isn't approved yet. And so that's where the CAP-GAP extension, that new regulation that had come out in 2008, can help that student continue to work while they're waiting for their H-1B to be approved. So I was curious, have any of you as employers had any when you had a previous experience with hiring an international student, were there any difficulties? Was it easy? Maybe you didn't get into the hands-on sort of part of that. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm the oldest one in this room, so I can talk about what it used to be. At one stage of the game, it got so bad that nobody in my office dared talk to me, nor my family, because we were going after an international student. She had international connections in Europe with ESA, all the things I needed, and she was multilingual. And I had to advertise at the time. I don't think we have to do this anymore. And the Washington person said it was unconscionable for my company to ask that a person was multilingual to work in my European contacts. And you know, the roof of this building would have gone off. So you know, those are some of the horror stories. Now we work, and you know, I'm very pleased. And with ICE, it used to be 12 months, and so I complained to ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, and they said, well, if you have applied for the H-1B, then we've never prosecuted. It's a gray area. Yeah, it's a gray area until they want to turn it over and nail you. So this piece of information paid for the time that I'm spending here today. And I'm curious. What we're trying to do, including President ASU, Crow, is forget the H-1Bs. We're now trying to go, if they're in a STEM program, it's called a Staple Act. And Flake, who's running for office from Cal ILC, is they get the degree, you staple a green card to them. That makes a world of difference. And if we want to be competitive, we are fighting for that in Washington. There are a lot of people who write me hate mails, but well, there's that many people who don't have a job.
Right.
All right, but that's the kind of experience, but it's apparently changing for the better. Tremendous.
So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.